The front door slammed with such force that the family photos on the walls quivered. My hand instinctively rested on my swollen belly, where my daughter responded with a sharp kick, as if protesting the sudden noise. Standing before me was my mother-in-law, Evelyn, her manicured finger pointing at the car keys on the counter, like a judge passing sentence. "Grab them," she demanded. "The grocery store closes in less than half an hour." I hesitated, glancing at the window where the storm raged outside, rain lashing against the glass. "It's not safe to drive in this weather," I said firmly, my voice edged with the exhaustion of late pregnancy. "Especially not in my condition." "Your condition?" Evelyn practically sneered, her tone dripping with disdain. "Pregnancy isn't some kind of disability, Paisley. When I was pregnant with Connor, I worked up until the moment my water broke. My name is Paisley, and at 9 months pregnant, I had become adept at choosing my battles with Evelyn Mitchell. But this time, it wasn't about my pride. It was about my baby's safety. "I can order groceries online," I offered, trying to stay calm. "They'll deliver first thing in the morning." "Absolutely not," Evelyn snapped, her voice cutting like glass. "I need fresh produce for my bridge club tomorrow." "A little rain won't hurt anyone," lightning flashed, illuminating her features in sharp relief. The crack of thunder that followed made my heart jump. "A little rain?" I gestured toward the window, my frustration bubbling over. "There's a severe weather warning right now. It's dangerous." Evelyn's lips twisted into a cold smile that never reached her eyes. "If you can't handle a simple errand, maybe Connor and I were right to worry about whether you're capable of being a mother." The accusation hit me harder than I expected. Connor and I, my husband and I hadn't spoken about any concerns like that. In truth, we barely talked about anything since Evelyn moved in 3 months ago, supposedly for a temporary housing crisis. "I said no," I responded, my voice firm despite the ache in my chest. Evelyn stepped closer, her expensive perfume wrapping around me like a cage. "Then I'll call Connor at work. He should know how his wife refuses to help his mother with the smallest of tasks." My phone buzzed in my pocket, probably Connor's usual evening check-in. I ignored it and stared back at Evelyn, noticing the faint crack in her self-assured expression as I stayed silent. "Go ahead," I said, my voice steady. "Call him." Before she could make good on her threat, the sound of tires on the driveway filled the room. Moments later, headlights lit up the walls, followed by the slam of a car door. "Looks like he's home early," I said, relief flooding my body. Evelyn's face shifted in an instant, her anger replaced by an overly sweet concern. She rushed to the door, opening it just as Connor stepped inside, rainwater dripping from his coat. "Connor, you're soaked. What are you doing out in this storm?" she exclaimed. Connor's eyes found mine first, then his mother's, before returning to me. "The office lost power," he explained. "They sent us home early." "What's going on here?" "Nothing," Evelyn said quickly, a little too quickly. "Paisley and I were just discussing tomorrow's plans." "Really?" Connor's gaze landed on the car keys still on the counter. Because it sounded like an argument from outside. The silence that followed was deafening. I placed my hands over my belly, feeling the strong kicks from my daughter as if she, too, could sense the tension. "Your wife," Evelyn began, her voice trembling in a way that suggested she was angling for sympathy, "refused to help me prepare for my bridge club. All I asked for was a quick trip to the store." Connor's eyes flickered from the storm outside to Evelyn's indignant face, then back to me. For the first time in months, I saw something shift in his expression, an understanding of the situation he hadn't acknowledged before. "Mom," he said, his voice calm but firm, "you can't be serious. No one should be out driving in weather like this, especially Paisley." "But my bridge club can wait," Connor interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Or they can meet somewhere else tomorrow." Evelyn's face twisted with hurt, but beneath it, I could see the anger simmering. She turned on her heel, muttering as she headed for the stairs. "I see how it is. My own son, siding with his wife against me. How quickly they forget who raised them." As the sound of her footsteps disappeared, Connor turned to me. His voice softened as he asked, "Has this been happening often?" I opened my mouth, but the words felt stuck in my throat. How do you explain that his mother had been chipping away at you every day? Finding new ways to make you feel small, inadequate, unworthy? Finally, I nodded, tears threatening to spill as I watched the realization dawn on him. For the first time, cracks began to form in the perfect image of his mother, and I could see his world shifting. 3 months ago, I stood in this very kitchen, watching Connor help his mother unpack her dishes. "It's just until the renovation's done," he'd assured me, pressing a quick kiss to my forehead. 2 weeks, tops. Now, her dishes filled the cabinets where mine used to be, and Evelyn's presence had crept into every part of our home like an unwelcome, insidious guest. The morning after the storm, I sat at the breakfast table, watching Connor make coffee. He hadn't brought up the argument from the previous night, but the tension between us was undeniable. "Your mom's bridge club meeting got cancelled," I said cautiously, testing his mood. Connor kept his back to me, carefully measuring coffee grounds. "Good. No one should have been out in that weather anyway. When are we going to talk about it?" The metal spoon clattered against the counter. "Talk about what?" "About the fact that your mom's 2-week stay has turned into 3 months. About how she's driving me insane. About how you see it, but you pretend not to." He turned to face me, his jaw tight. "She's my mother, Paisley. And I'm your wife. Your pregnant wife." The sound of footsteps descending the stairs cut through our tense silence. Evelyn appeared, perfectly put together in her silk robe, as though the storm and the previous night's events had barely affected her. "Good morning, darling." She greeted Connor warmly, then gave me a half-hearted nod. "I hope you don't mind, but I've decided to host the bridge club here next week." The renovation crew called again. Apparently, there's been another delay at my house. I clenched my fists under the table, my frustration threatening to boil over. "Another delay?" "Of course." Connor frowned. "What kind of delay?" "Oh, you know how these things go. Permits, inspections, all the red tape," she said dismissively. "Could be another month or 2. The scrape of my chair on the floor was sharp as I stood. "Excuse me, I need to check something in the office." Shaking, I pulled up the city's building permit website. My fingers flew across the keyboard, searching for her address. When the results appeared, my stomach dropped. No active permits. No pending applications. Nothing to suggest her house was under renovation. I printed out the proof, the pages emerging crisp and undeniable. As I reached for the paper, a shadow loomed over me. "Digging around, are we?" Evelyn's voice dripped with false sweetness. I turned, clutching the paper to my chest. "There aren't any renovations, are there? You've been lying this whole time." Her sugary smile vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Connor needs me here. He always has. You're temporary. Just the vessel for my grandchild. Once the baby is born, he'll see how unstable you are. And then he'll turn to me, like he always does." "You're wrong about him." "Am I?" She leaned in, her tone venomous. "Who has he defended every time you've complained? Who is he siding with right now?" She reached out, as if to pat my cheek, but I jerked away. My grip tightened on the paper. "Get out of my house." Her laugh was low, almost mocking. "Your house?" I raised Connor in a house just like this. I taught him everything about family and loyalty. You're just borrowing his life. I'm permanent. I pushed past her and marched into the kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest. Connor was still at the counter, pouring his coffee, oblivious to the battle raging in his own home. "Connor," I began, my voice trembling. "We need to talk about your mom's renovation." "Not now, Paisley. I'm already running late for work." "There is no renovation." I held out the paper. "Check for yourself. It's all a lie." Connor glanced at the printout, then turned toward Evelyn, who had followed me into the room. "Mom," her eyes filled with tears almost instantly, her voice quivering. "Oh, sweetheart. I didn't want to burden you. The truth is, I've been struggling since your father passed. The house sits in foreclosure. I was too ashamed to tell you. His face softened as he pulled her into a hug. Why didn't you just tell me? I didn't want to add to your stress, she murmured, her voice laced with feigned vulnerability. You and Paisley have so much to worry about with the baby. I thought I could handle it on my own. I watched, stunned, as he comforted her. Over her shoulder, Evelyn's triumphant, knowing gaze locked with mine. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just battling her lies. I was fighting for my family. If I wanted to save what little was left of my marriage, I needed undeniable proof. And I knew exactly how to get it. The recording started innocently enough, Evelyn making sly remarks when Connor wasn't around, jabs at my parenting abilities, criticisms of my weight, my clothes, my cooking. But today, what I captured was far more sinister. Sitting in my car outside the bank, I replayed the conversation I'd recorded that morning between Evelyn and a man named James. Her voice was clear, dripping with satisfaction. The foreclosure notice worked perfectly, she said with a laugh. Connor bought it without question. Now all I need is to convince him to add me to the deed, just for security purposes, of course. He's always been so easy to sway. My hands shook as I stopped the recording. My chest felt tight, as though the weight of her betrayal was suffocating me. This wasn't just about her controlling our lives anymore. This was theft. She was planning to take our home. I tried calling Connor, but his phone went straight to voicemail. He was likely in court, defending some high-profile client, while his mother schemed to destroy everything we'd worked for. A sudden tap on my window startled me. Looking up, I saw Evelyn standing there, her smile unnervingly calm and calculated. I cracked the window just enough to hear her. "Well, this is a surprise," she said, her tones syrupy sweet. "Following me now, Paisley?" "I had a doctor's appointment." I lied without hesitation. "What brings you to the bank?"
Oh,
"Just taking care of some financial matters," she replied smoothly. "Connor and I have been discussing adding my name to some documents for estate planning. Family has to stick together after all." "Is that what you told James?" For the briefest moment, her smile faltered. "James? I don't know anyone by that name." "Really?" I leaned forward, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. "Because I heard you talking to him this morning about the fake foreclosure notice." Her mask dropped completely, replaced by cold calculation. "Careful, Paisley," she said, her tone low and threatening. "Pregnancy does strange things to a woman's mind. Makes her paranoid, even delusional. It'd be awful if Connor had to start worrying about your mental health right now." "Is that a threat?" She tilted her head, her voice honeyed again. "I'm concerned for you, dear. These accusations, your behavior, it's all so erratic. As a grandmother, it's my duty to speak up if something seems off." I turned the key in the ignition. "I need to leave." "Of course," she said, stepping back. Her mask firmly in place again, she added, "Oh, and Paisley? I took the liberty of calling Dr. Reynolds about some of your concerns. He agreed that a psychiatric evaluation might be in everyone's best interest for the baby's well-being." My blood ran cold. She'd gotten to my doctor. I drove home in a haze, my thoughts racing. When I walked through the door, I found Connor there, home earlier than usual. His expression stopped me in my tracks. "Mom told me you were following her today," he said, his voice laced with concern.
she's worried about you.
"I'm worried about you." "Connor, listen." Dr. Reynolds called. He interrupted, raising a hand to silence me. "He thinks you might be experiencing prenatal anxiety. He suggested we see a specialist." "Let me guess," I said bitterly. "Your mother already picked one out for me?" Before he could respond, Evelyn appeared at the top of the stairs, descending with her usual composed air. "Perfect timing," she said brightly. "Connor, did you tell her about the appointment I made with Dr. Chin? She's excellent with cases like this." I turned to her, my voice cutting through the room. "I'm not going to any doctor you choose, Evelyn. This manipulation stops now." "Paisley," Connor said softly, his tone bordering on patronizing. "You're not thinking clearly." "Not thinking clearly?" I snapped, my voice trembling with both anger and desperation. Your mother is trying to steal our house.
Connor.
She faked the foreclosure. She's manipulating you into adding her to the deed. I have proof. That's enough, he shouted, his sudden anger catching me off guard. Mom's right. You need help. Evelyn stood behind him, her expression calm and victorious, as if she had just won the war she had been waging all along. And, in that moment, I realized I was fighting not just for my sanity but for the truth, and for the life I wanted for my family. I looked at them, my husband, the man I had built my life with, standing next to the woman who was tearing it apart piece by piece. I knew then that I needed help, but not the kind they were plotting for me. I took out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the name that might hold the key. Margaret Nolan, Evelyn's oldest friend. She was the only person who might know enough to uncover the truth. When I hit dial, Evelyn's expression shifted. For the first time since she moved in, I saw real fear flicker in her eyes. Margaret answered quickly. I always knew you'd call me one day, she said, her voice steady, but tinged with something deeper. There was a pause, heavy with unspoken history. Meet me tomorrow at the Cedar Grove Cafe, 10 a.m. Come alone. That evening, I glanced at the closed guest room door where Evelyn had retreated after my phone call. The house felt like it was one wrong step away from an explosion. Connor hadn't spoken to me since our earlier argument, choosing instead to stay in his home office. A sharp kick from the baby reminded me of everything that was at stake. I placed my hand on my belly and whispered, I promise I'll fix this before you arrive. Morning came with the sound of muffled voices downstairs. I crept to the stairwell, staying hidden as their conversation reached my ears. The psychiatric hold would just be temporary, Evelyn was saying. Once the baby is born, we can reassess whether she's fit to raise it.
Mom.
Isn't that extreme? Connor's voice sounded uneasy. Connor, she's delusional, following me, making accusations, recording everything. What if she does something dangerous when she's alone with the baby? My heart froze. A psychiatric hold. They were planning to take my baby away from me. I'll think about it, Connor said, though he didn't sound convinced. I retreated, my mind racing. I had to leave without raising suspicion. Grabbing my phone, car keys, and the USB drive with my recordings, I slipped out the back door while they were still talking. At the Cedar Grove Cafe, I found Margaret waiting in a corner booth. Her silver hair gleamed under the soft light, her sharp gaze taking me in as I approached. You look just like I did 30 years ago, she said as I sat down, determined and scared. You knew this would happen? She stirred her coffee slowly. Evelyn has a pattern. She pulled this with Connor's first serious girlfriend in college. The poor girl had a breakdown. Everyone blamed academic stress, but I knew better. Why didn't you say anything back then? Who would have believed me? Evelyn is very skilled at what she does. She leaned forward, her eyes sharp. But you have something I didn't. Proof. I placed the USB drive on the table. She's trying to get me committed. If she succeeds, they'll take my baby. Of course they will, Margaret said matter-of-factly. That's Evelyn's goal, complete control. She'll raise the baby as her own second chance, and Connor will let her because he'll believe you're unfit. My hands shook as I picked up my glass of water. I need your help. Margaret's expression turned serious. What I'm about to tell you could destroy more than Evelyn. It could shatter Connor's faith in everything he knows about her. Are you ready for that? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Connor. Where are you? Mom's worried. Dr. Chun is here for your evaluation. Another message followed. Please come home. We can work this out. I looked at Margaret, panic rising. They're trying to trap me. Margaret reached across the table, her hand steadying mine. Listen carefully. 28 years ago, Evelyn had another son. She lost custody after. The door chimed, cutting her off. I turned to see Connor standing there, his face a mask of betrayal. Behind him, Evelyn entered, her expression calm but calculating. I tracked your phone, Connor said flatly. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice soft and soothing. Darling, We're here to help you.
Dr.
Chun is waiting at home. Let's get this sorted out. I looked back at Margaret, pleading silently. She straightened in her seat, her gaze never wavering. Tell them about David, Margaret said firmly. Evelyn's composure shattered in an instant. Margaret, don't. Connor's brow furrowed as he looked at his mother. Who's David? I hit record on my phone, knowing this moment could shatter the facade Evelyn had built. Sometimes survival isn't about escaping, it's about staying strong long enough to reveal the truth. As Margaret began to speak, I knew this was my chance to do both. The name David hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Connor's face turned pale as his sharp mind began piecing together a puzzle he never realized existed. He was your brother, Margaret said firmly, her voice unwavering. Born 6 years before you. Evelyn lunged forward, her hand knocking over the water glass on the table. Stop this.
No.
Connor said, his voice low but steady. It's not nearly enough. What happened to him? The once busy cafe had emptied, leaving only a nervous waitress hovering near the counter. My phone continued to record, capturing every word, every breath, every crack in Evelyn's armor. Your mother lost custody, Margaret said, her gaze fixed on Evelyn. After I protected him. Evelyn's voice broke, her carefully maintained facade crumbling. He was fragile, like you, Connor. The world would have crushed him. I had to make him stronger. Connor took a step back, his disbelief palpable. What did you do to him? The same thing she's planning for our baby, I interjected, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Control through isolation. Fear disguised as love. Until he couldn't take it anymore. He wasn't strong enough. Evelyn hissed, her anger flaring. But I won't make the same mistakes with your daughter. This time, I'll get it right. And suddenly, everything fell into place. Her obsession with my pregnancy, her efforts to portray me as unstable, her constant need to dominate every aspect of our lives. She wasn't just repeating history. She was rewriting it to fit her own twisted version of redemption. Connor turned to Margaret, his voice shaking. Where is he now? Margaret's expression softened, her sadness unmistakable.
Gone.
He died by suicide at 16. Just 6 months after the courts took him out of her care. A sound escaped Evelyn that didn't even seem human. Grabbing her purse, she fled the cafe without looking back, leaving Connor standing there, his world in tatters. The psychiatric hold, he whispered, his voice hollow. The custody threats.
It was all a setup.
Just like with David, I said softly, my words landing like a hammer. Connor stumbled back, reaching for a chair to steady himself. I almost let her. God, Paisley. I almost. Margaret's voice cut through a spiral. We need to move quickly. Evelyn won't stay gone for long. She'll either come back with backup or start destroying evidence. I realized with a jolt that everything we'd collected, the recordings, the documents, could be in danger. Connor's phone buzzed in his hand. Evelyn's name flashed on the screen. He stared at it for a long moment before declining the call. You're right, he said, his voice resolute. We need to get home.
Now.
The drive home was suffocating. The silence heavy except for the occasional bursts of Evelyn's voice playing through the recordings. I showed Connor the damning evidence, her threats, her conversation with James about the deed, her plans to take custody of our baby. Pull over, he said abruptly. I thought he was furious, but when he turned to me, his eyes were filled with tears. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice trembling. I should have seen this. I should have protected you. You're protecting us now, I replied, taking his hand and placing it on my belly. Our daughter kicked in steady reassurance. His phone buzzed. Breaking the moment, a text from our neighbor. Smoke coming from your house. Fire trucks on the way. When we arrived, 3 fire trucks were parked in the driveway. Thick smoke poured out of the upstairs windows, right where our home office was located. My stomach dropped. That was where I had stored the USB backups, along with Connor's most important documents. She's burning it all, I whispered, horror gripping me. Then we saw her. Evelyn stood in the upstairs window, her silhouette framed by the flames. She was feeding something into the fire. Papers, photographs, maybe both. "Mom," Connor shouted, panic in his voice. "Get out of there." Evelyn looked down at us, her expression unnervingly calm. "I protected him," she called out. "I'll protect all of you." Firefighters were rushing into the house as Connor tried to follow. I grabbed his arm, doubling over as a sharp contraction ripped through me. "Too early," I gasped. "Something's wrong with the baby." The paramedics arrived quickly, loading me into the ambulance as the fire raged on. Smoke billowed from the roof, and Evelyn remained visible in the window, a shadow against the chaos. She was destroying one life's evidence while I fought to bring another into the world. The last thing I heard before the ambulance doors shut was Connor's anguished voice, torn between two impossible choices. Save them. Please, save them. I wasn't sure who he meant anymore, his wife and unborn child, or the mother who had finally revealed her true self. The hospital was a blur of lights and voices. Another contraction gripped me, sending waves of pain radiating through my body. I could barely make out the chaos around me, machines beeping, nurses calling out vitals, and Connor's voice rising in a heated argument just beyond the door. "She's not allowed in here," he was shouting. "I don't care if she's family. I have rights." Evelyn's voice cut through, shrill and unrelenting. "That's my grandchild." I gripped the bed rails, fighting to stay focused as the pain became unbearable. The acrid scent of smoke still clung to my clothes, a bitter reminder of everything we had lost: our home, the evidence, our sense of security. All gone in the fire. "Her blood pressure is spiking," a nurse yelled. "We need to stabilize her now." Through the haze, I caught a glimpse of the hallway. Evelyn was arguing with security guards, her clothes still singed, her expression wild. Connor was blocking her path, his voice breaking with rage. "Your rights," he demanded. "Like your rights with David?" "Everything I did out of love," Evelyn screamed, tears streaking her face. "You don't know what it takes to protect a child." Another contraction hit, and the steady rhythm of the baby's monitor faltered. "The baby's heart rate is dropping," a nurse called out. "We need to prep for an emergency C-section." The doctor's voice was calm but firm. "The umbilical cord might be compressed. We have to move quickly." Connor rushed to my side, gripping my hand. "I'm here, Paisley. I'm not leaving you." "Sir, you'll need to step out and change into scrubs if you want to stay for the procedure," a nurse said, gently but urgently. As Connor moved to comply, Evelyn seized the opportunity. She slipped past the security guards and into the room, her eyes wild with desperation. Evelyn rushed to my bedside, her hands reaching out to my belly as if she had every right to claim what wasn't hers. "I'll make it right this time," she whispered, her voice trembling with a manic edge. "I'll show you all." The monitors blared as my blood pressure surged. Nurses hurried to pull her away, but Evelyn clung to the bed rail with a grip that seemed fueled by desperation. "You're killing them both," Connor yelled as he burst back into the room. "I'm saving them," Evelyn screamed back, her voice raw with delusion. In one swift motion, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a syringe. The liquid inside glinted under the harsh fluorescent lights. Just like I tried to save David. Chaos erupted. Security lunged for her as she advanced toward me, the syringe slipping from her grasp and clattering to the floor. My vision blurred with pain, the pressure in my head mounting. The last thing I saw before the world tilted was Connor's horrified expression as two police officers entered the room. "What was in the syringe?" the doctor demanded, retrieving it with gloved hands. "What did she try to inject her with?" Evelyn's voice was eerily calm as she replied, as if explaining something mundane. "The same thing I gave David. To keep him close, to keep him safe." Darkness consumed me, bringing with it a crushing sense of failure. I'd failed to protect our home. Connor had failed to see the truth. And somewhere, in the echoes of a tragic past, a boy named David had been failed by everyone. I awoke to a swirl of voices and blinding lights. "The baby's heart rate is still dropping," someone shouted. Her blood pressure is dangerously high. We need to move now. Through the fog, Connor's voice reached me. It was shaky but firm, an anchor in the storm. Paisley, they need to put you under. Please promise me you'll come back to us. I forced out a whisper through dry lips. The baby, don't let her near our daughter. Promise me. Tears streaked his face as he nodded. I promise. But you have to promise to come back. The anesthesia mask descended over my face, and just as the darkness claimed me, I heard Margaret's voice, clear and unyielding. It ends here, Evelyn. No more children. No more chances. When I woke, the first thing I heard was the sharp cry of a newborn. The room was bright and sterile, the ache in my body a dull throb compared to the joy that pierced through me at that sound. Connor sat nearby, holding our daughter. His face was pale, lined with exhaustion, but his hands cradled her protectively. When he saw me stir, his expression softened, and he brought her closer. She's perfect, he whispered, and you're going to be okay. I reached out, longing to feel her warmth, but something in Connor's voice was off, strained, as if a shadow still loomed over us. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her face grim. She looked like someone who had fought battles long before this one, her resolve unshaken. Evelyn escaped custody during transport, she said, her words sharp and heavy. Connor's head snapped up. What? The syringe contained sedatives, Margaret continued. The same type found in David's autopsy. Hospital security is searching for her now. The monitors beside me beeped faster as my heart rate climbed. Connor held our daughter closer, his knuckles white against the blanket. She's here, he asked, his voice filled with disbelief and anger. Margaret nodded solemnly. She won't leave without finishing what she started. As if on cue, the door clicked shut behind Margaret. We turned as one. And there she stood, Evelyn, still in her smoke-stained clothes, her hair disheveled and wild. In her trembling hands, she held a worn baby album. I saved this, she said softly, her voice almost reverent. From the fire. I saved what really matters. Connor shifted subtly, his hand moving toward the call button, but Evelyn raised her other hand. And it was another syringe, ready and waiting. Don't, she said, her voice deceptively calm. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I just want to explain. I need you to understand. Understand? Margaret's voice cut through like a knife. Like you made David understand? Before or after you started drugging him? I protected him. Evelyn's voice cracked, her carefully composed exterior finally breaking. The world was too cruel, too unforgiving. He needed guidance, he needed control, just like she does. Her gaze landed on my daughter, and an icy chill ran through me. Mom, Connor said, his voice trembling, you killed him.
No.
Evelyn shouted, her tone wild and defensive. The foster family killed him. They let him think he could live without me. I was making him stronger. Summoning all my strength, I pushed myself upright despite the pain. By poisoning him? Small doses, she replied, as if it were a reasonable justification. Just enough to keep him calm, manageable, safe. Margaret stepped forward, her steady gaze fixed on Evelyn, until he fought back. Evelyn clutched the tattered baby book to her chest like a lifeline. He didn't understand. None of you understand. A mother's love has to be. Has to be what? Connor demanded, his voice rising. Controlling? Poisonous? Deadly. Perfect. Evelyn screamed, the word reverberating through the room. It has to be perfect. She lunged forward, the syringe raised, but Margaret moved faster, grabbing Evelyn's arm as security officers burst into the room. The baby book tumbled to the floor, its pages spilling photographs across the tiles. The scattered images told a harrowing story. They captured a boy's descent, from a bright-eyed child full of hope to a hollowed teenager drained of life. The final photo, a school portrait, showed a vacant expression, the light in his eyes extinguished by years of Evelyn's twisted definition of love. As the guards restrained her, Evelyn's screams echoed through the room. I loved him. I loved him perfectly. Connor stepped closer, tears streaming down his face.
No, ma'am.
You didn't love him. You loved the control you had over him, just like you loved your control over me. The guards dragged her away, her voice fading into the distance. The baby book lay open on the floor, its scattered pages a haunting reminder of lives destroyed by her toxic obsession. Connor returned to me, cradling our daughter in his arms. I held her close, breathing in her soft, sweet scent. In the doorway, Margaret stood like a guardian, her expression resolute but tinged with sadness. She'll be evaluated, Margaret said quietly.
And charged.
There's enough evidence now, the sedatives, David's case files, the recordings you made. She won't be able to hurt anyone else. I looked down at my daughter, her tiny face filled with infinite potential, the kind Evelyn had tried so desperately to erase. What was his real name? I asked softly. Before she changed it to David? Margaret's lips curved into a bittersweet smile. Connor. His name was Connor, too. The sharp intake of breath from my husband was the only sound in the room as the weight of the truth settled over us. The silence deepened, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the monitors and the soft breaths of our newborn daughter. Connor stood frozen, the revelation pressing down on him like a physical burden. His name was Connor? He asked, his voice barely audible, cracking under the weight of his emotions. Margaret nodded solemnly, her gaze heavy with regret. She changed it to David after she lost custody. She thought if she erased his name, his identity, she could rewrite the past. She wanted to forget, to start over. Connor's hands trembled as he ran them through his hair. She told me I was her only child. She told me. His voice faltered, and he swallowed hard. That was part of her control, Margaret explained gently. Erasing him, erasing the truth, so no one would ever question her version of what happened. I reached out, placing my hand on Connor's. He looked at me, his face a mixture of grief and guilt. She's gone now, I said softly. She can't hurt us anymore. Connor glanced at our daughter, his jaw tightening with determination. But the damage is done. 2 days after the fire, we returned to the smoldering ruins of our home. The flames had consumed nearly everything upstairs, including the office where all our crucial documents and recordings had been stored. The insurance adjuster confirmed what we already knew. It was a total loss. As we sifted through the ashes, Connor uncovered something the fire hadn't touched. Behind a collapsed shelf, shielded by its sturdy metal casing, was a small lockbox. That belonged to David, Margaret said softly from the doorway, her voice heavy with the weight of old memories. She kept it even after everything. With trembling hands, Connor opened the lockbox. Inside, we found a journal filled with the frantic handwriting of a desperate teenager. Beneath it lay a letter, neatly addressed, to my other brother. Later, in the cramped kitchen of our temporary apartment, Connor read the letter aloud. If you're reading this, it means she's come for you too. But maybe you were stronger than me. Maybe you survived. Her love, her perfect love, it's poison. It took everything from me. My friends, my freedom, my future. The doctors say the damage is permanent. Even if I stop the medicine now, my body is already failing. But maybe you'll see her for what she is before she makes you disappear too. Connor's voice cracked as he finished the letter. Beneath it was a photo of David with a friend's family. Unlike the others, this picture showed David truly happy, smiling without fear. On the back, a date was written, just 3 days before his death. He chose freedom, Margaret said quietly, even knowing it would cost him everything. Connor placed the journal on the table, his shoulders shaking. The court wants me to testify next week, he whispered. They want both of us, I reminded him, squeezing his hand. Connor looked down at Hope, her tiny fingers curling around his. Tears slipped down his cheeks as he spoke softly. We named her Hope for a reason. Not because we're naive, but because we're defiant. We're choosing hope, even in the face of everything. Weeks turned into months. Evelyn remained in custody, facing charges of attempted assault, fraud, and reckless endangerment. Her psychiatric evaluations revealed she suffered from a hereditary condition, one that fed her need for control and delusion. One evening, as we sat together with Hope, Connor spoke firmly. "We're not her," he said, his voice steady. "We never will be." Margaret visited often, slowly revealing fragments of Evelyn's past. Her stories painted a picture of pain and trauma, but also laid bare the deep harm Evelyn had inflicted on others. One day, Margaret handed me an envelope. "Evelyn's psychiatric evaluation," she said, her voice gentle. "You should know the truth for Hope's sake." I held the envelope in my hands, feeling the weight of everything inside. But Connor's words echoed in my mind. "We are not her." Standing in the nursery of our newly rebuilt home, I gazed at Hope, her bright eyes unclouded by the past. Connor entered the room, holding the photo of David we'd found in the lockbox. "We should frame this," he said suddenly, holding it up. "So she knows where she comes from, and what she was saved from." Tears filled my eyes as I nodded. The photo wasn't just a memory of what had been lost. It was a symbol of everything we had overcome. As we hung the photo on the nursery wall, sunlight streamed through the window, casting warm rays across the room. It was morning light, something the old house had never seen. Morning light where evening shadows had once loomed. In the end, it wasn't revenge that saved us. It was truth. A boy's heartbreaking journal, a brother's awakening, and the courage to end a generational cycle of control and pain. Hope stirred in her crib, her tiny fingers reaching toward the sunlight. She was untouched by Evelyn's bitterness, untainted by the darkness of the past. We would rebuild, we would remember, and above all, we would love differently.